Now, one of the narratives from the Clinton campaign is that Republicans are not going after Bernie Sanders. They're not going after Sanders. They're not, attacking him because, well, it's because they want to face him in November. And they say that if we nominate Bernie Sanders, well, you better get ready for President Trump or President Cruz, right? Now, that's all despite the polling on head-to-head matchups that have both Clinton and Sanders beating all the Republicans, with Sanders doing better in most cases. Now, there's the idea. There's also the idea that Karl Rove, and I hear this a lot, is launching political attack ads to try to help Bernie Sanders. They want Sanders to win. They want Sanders because it'll be so easy. We can just put up a hammer and a sickle, and then it's over, right? It's over. Yeah, ignoring all the polling and stuff. Okay, great. Now, it turns out, interestingly enough, that one Republican strategist is fearing the Bern. Now, in a conversation with Santa Monica Public Radio's KCRW on Wednesday, Republican strategist Dave Carney speculated that Senator Bernie Sanders could actually pose a bigger threat to the GOP in a general election than Hillary Clinton could. He said, quote, Sanders has tapped into a powerful populist anger. And he adds, as has Trump. And that sentiment isn't easy for opposing candidates to overcome. Quote, Bernie does the exact same thing that Trump does on the different side of the coin. They talk about this economic disconnect between the elites and the rest of us, and they have different prescriptions for fixing that, but it is the same anger, the same concern. Now that's interesting, because we've been saying that before. That's why in New Hampshire, if you can remember, Trump people went to try and convert Senator Sanders supporters because they wanted, to get those people over to vote for Trump. Now, you're saying, wait a minute, Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump are diametrically opposed. Well, it turns out they're both tapping into that same anger against the establishment. Now, he's right, different prescriptions, right? And different blames. While Trump blames the Mexicans, the Muslims, Sanders says, no, this is the elite, this is Wall Street, this is greed, this is the establishment that's been screwing us over. Not the Mexicans, not the Muslims. And he actually lays out plans and explains how he would actually pay for the different policies that he says. And this is what we can do about income inequality. We have to have a political revolution in order to overthrow the establishment, right, and elect progressives to get progressive priorities done. Now, remember, see, we talked about a poll the other day where 54% of Americans were open to that political revolution, to redistribute wealth from the top to the middle class. So a majority of Americans are in favor of that. Now, Sanders does very well with independents, as well as people who are also very liberal. So Sanders has a very wide support, right? He can go to the independents, he can go to the gun owners, and he can go to the people who are incredibly liberal. Wide base of support. And of course, Trump would try to tap into that. You would want to. It's because they share something in common. The anger and the feeling that the establishment, that the elites have screwed us over. And it's true. You can check all the data on this. How wages are stagnant, how productivity has gone up, how corporate profits have soared in executive bonuses. But how the middle class and the poor our wages have been stagnant. We're not getting good jobs anymore. And everything costs so much more money. This is stuff that everybody identifies with in the middle class and the working class. That's who Sanders, ironically, that's who Sanders and Trump speak to. That anger about the system, about getting fucked. Now, Trump, I don't think he'll get the very liberal people. I think that's pretty obvious. Or the Hillary supporters. But when it comes to moderates and independents, those people are up for grabs. And that should worry both Republicans and Democrats. And it seems like It is. But then again, right, he's a socialist. I mean, once people see that, it's over for Sanders, right? It turns out not really. Now, Carney said that while Sanders' self-description as a democratic socialist might alienate some people, it ultimately becomes irrelevant once voters enter the voting booth. Why? I mean, yeah, socialists, they've been smeared. People get smeared as a socialist, they're done, right? Well, that's what happened in the old days. Now, people have these things called smartphones and the thing called the internet, where in the blink of an eye, unless you hit a dead zone, you can look up the word democratic socialism. You can look up what it means and examples of these programs. For example, Social Security, which is incredibly popular. Even the plan to expand it is also incredibly popular, and a majority of Americans want it. Medicare, same thing. Very popular. People like it. Higher minimum wages. Most of Americans want it. Doesn't matter who you are. Doesn't matter what political ideology you fit into. You want to get paid more for your work. Affordable college, same thing. Turns out that people really like those proposals. And when they look at that and they look it up, they say, oh, gee, what Bernie Sanders is talking about is pretty good. I guess I'm a socialist. Maybe you are. That's because socialism doesn't mean a government takeover. Democratic socialism doesn't. It means that we all put in and we all get something out. We put in through our taxes and we get things in return. You pay taxes, you get health care. It's not a perfect system by any means. However, it's a lot better than what we have now, where we pay more for less. We're getting screwed. We're getting gypped. And we don't want to. Remember, there's still millions of people that can't afford health care. Now, there's the big numbers, like only 10% of people aren't covered. Well, it's a little bit more complicated than that. Because there are people that have insurance, but they can't afford deductibles, and the prices continue to rise. Sure, they have health insurance. That doesn't exactly mean they can go and get health care. That is a problem. I think health care is a human right. So does Senator Sanders. So, another criticism I hear is, well, Bernie Sanders didn't do anything. He was in office for 25 years. He got nothing done. So what's he going to do for me? What's he going to do for me? What has he done for us? Well, according to his, or I should say, during his tenure in Congress, Sanders has sponsored 3 bills. Only 3 bills that he sponsored were passed into law. 2 of which were rather slight matters involving the naming of USPS facilities, and one of which was the Veterans Compensation Cost of Living Adjustment Act of 2013. Now, it provided an increase of the rates of compensation for veterans with service-connected disabilities. Okay, good. So it's a cost of living increase. You get more benefits. Now you probably look at that and say, okay, wow, 3 bills. 2 were post office. Come on, dude. That's terrible. He hasn't done anything, right? 3 bills, that don't count. Well, it turns out it's actually very, very hard to pass legislation. According to GovTrack, which tracks different legislation, only a handful of bills submitted in Congress, which is about 4 to 6%, are ever brought to a vote, and about 2 to 4% end up being passed. So with that in mind, 3 pieces of successful legislation passed isn't all that unusual. But there is more to the job than just sponsoring bills. They also co-sponsor legislation submitted by colleagues. Now on Sanders, he's co-sponsored legislation for 200 different successful bills. So that's pretty good, right? They also muster support or opposition among colleagues in the public for proposed legislation. They review and vote on proposed bills, serve on various committees. Sanders, for example, holds 6 Senate committee appointments, including being the chair of the Senate Committee on Veterans Affairs. They also meet with constituents, participate in oversight and investigation of government affairs, etc., etc. So they actually do more than just pass legislation. So with that in mind, I also want to note that the very same criticism was also hurled at Secretary Clinton by Jeb Bush. Oh, when she was in the Senate, she didn't do anything. She did absolutely nothing. Turns out, no. That was also wrong. Hillary Clinton has actually had a ton of accomplishments in her time in public service. But to be fair, let's judge her by the same metric as Senator Sanders, for example. Right? So her time in elected office as Senator of New York, which she served about 2 terms. So during her tenure, she sponsored 3 bills. Same as Senator Sanders. S 1241, a bill to establish the Cape Mulleney National Historic Site in the state of New York. S 3613, a bill to name a post office Mayor George Cuomo Post Office Building. And S 3145, a bill to designate a highway in New York as the Timothy J. Russert Highway. Okay, so naming 3 different places. Great. Okay. Now, for sponsorship, she co-sponsored 74 bills that became law. One of them was the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act. Great. Okay. Hey, awesome. She was actually one of the 54 different co-sponsors on that act. And so was Senator Sanders. She also sponsored 3 amendments on a bill for security and disaster funding. So in the Senate, Hillary Clinton had some pretty good accomplishments, right? And since Senator Sanders had served longer, he had more accomplishments. Now, it turns out that the passage of sponsored and co-sponsored bills doesn't really matter as much when it comes to overall accomplishments in public service. Here's why. Now, according to 2 experts who study Congress, Norman Ornstein, scholar at the American Enterprise Institute, and Sarah Binder, a political science professor at George Washington University and the Brookings Institute scholar, said that the number of co-sponsored or sponsored bills signed into law is not a thorough measure of effectiveness or productivity for a member of the Senate. Offering amendments on the floor, she says, holding hearings, contributing to oversight, helping to negotiate agreements, pushing federal agencies to be responsive to constituents back home, all of these might contribute to making a senator effective. But none of these endeavors, of course, would show up in a count of bills sponsored or passed or enacted. So to judge either Hillary Clinton or Bernie Sanders on this measure alone is absolute horseshit. Don't do it. Saying either of them don't have a record of accomplishments or that both of them didn't do anything is flat wrong. And anybody saying that needs to do this.
Cut it out.
Listen to the secretary. Cut it out. We don't need it. It's wrong. So back to Carney, right? So there's that criticism of Senator Sanders debunked. Back to Carney. Now he recalled Republicans who dismissed Obama in 2008, passing him off as a 2-year senator who has done nothing, with no real prospects in the general election. Now they said that about Obama too. Obama won 2008. Once again, bullshit, right? Now finally, Carney concluded, I think Bernie would bring new energy to the general election, and I would be more worried about him. That's from a Republican strategist. It turns out that Senator Sanders has excited young people. Women, independents, moderates, first-time voters, and people who've been to the polls before. The more people involved in the process, the better. Turns out democracy thrives when everyone gets involved. Hillary supporters, Bernie supporters, look, if we turn out, we win, right? And it's that excitement, the fact that we could have a huge turnout, especially under Bernie Sanders, is what the GOP is most worried about. Because it turns out, the higher the voting population that turns out to the polls, the less of a chance the GOP has to win. Look up the goo-goo syndrome, if you know what I'm talking about.